Brian Harman, the current Open champion, has a unique motion that is heavily relied upon by his unusual setup and compensatory motions in his swing. Today we learn how he does it and why setup is the most important aspect to look at based on your body set makeup. Stop falling for the tips and tricks to hit it 20 yards further in minutes. Instead, allow me to help you understand the golf swing and that each swing is as unique as a fingerprint and should be treated that way. If you find any enjoyment or learn something from this video, please support us by commenting, liking, or even subscribing as we donate this channel's revenue to the Heal the Hood Foundation to help low-income children get into golf in South Africa. But right now, let's take a look at the great Brian Harman. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Mr. Waggle himself, Brian Harman, and we're going to go over a few things that I see that helps his swing and how it works. And we're going to dissect his swing, and remember, golf swings always work around the setup, and we can see a little different setup on the left side of the screen, and we can see that excessive shoulder tilt which pushes his hands out. Now you might say that that golf ball position relative to his hands are pretty good because his hands are still behind that ball. However, if we take a look at that golf ball position relative to his shoulder tilt, it is on his left shoulder. So he is already setting up to launch this golf ball. Now he has forward pressed his hands relative to that golf ball because of his spine angle. So keep that in mind. If he were to truly set up correctly, that golf ball should be right about here. But in order to hit the golf ball with that ball position way out there, he'd have to manipulate even more. So he has some manipulations, but obviously he can win an Open championship, so he is very good at what he does. And again, don't try and emulate any of this stuff at home. You always need to work with the golf pro. This channel is purely for education purposes. So let's start. We're going to leave that ball position relative to his shoulders to see how he works around that. Right side of the screen looks a pretty standard setup here, slightly open, but that's Riviera number 10. I don't know if he's playing a cut or if that's just how he sets up. It could also be the camera angle. And shout out to the two videos I used. Their YouTube channel is linked in the description below, so go check them out. But we can see his lower plane line is pretty close to 90 degrees to his spine angle line, so that's what we see typically on better players. It just makes it easy to turn and tilt. Now, because of that unusual setup on the left side, he does have to turn a lot more at impact to hold off his release, and we see some manipulations. He's a former baseball player, so he can definitely manipulate his body when he needs to. Let's take it back to that midway point. We're going to go left side first. We can see a lot of hand rotation coming off that center of his body fairly quick. Not a lot of turning going on here, so he's just disconnecting, but hey, it's okay. Nowadays, we see these tour players trying to get the width established. Now remember, he's not a very tall man, so he doesn't really gain his power from his width of arc. He gains his power from his lower body rotation and his upper body tilting. So we see how he does this correctly. Right side of the screen, we're going to take that club to the same position, and we can see those arms kind of lifting up. Not as much turn as we see. Lower body staying pretty steady. Upper body's getting some rotation going down there. But if you compare this to other players, let's say Rory, you see most of this taken away with the whole body. We see a slight separation between the club head and the hands. The club face in comparison to his spine angle, if we draw the club face up here, we can see it's rolling open. Now, if this is how you swing, you probably don't feel a lot of stretching on your lead side. If you want to stand up right now and give it a try, see when you roll your hands open, your shoulder tilt will usually level out. You don't feel a lot of stretch on your left side. But if you keep them connected to your center line, which is the spine angle, and the club face is matching that spine angle, you have to turn more with your body to keep things relative, and you have an extreme wide arc by doing so. Most of us can't do it though, because we don't stretch enough and we sit in computer desks like myself all day long, and that's hard to do. So we see a lot of hand manipulation, but he does things correct on the way down to counteract this hand manipulation. So let's take it back a little bit further. Left side of the screen here, we're going to see this motion. It's still hands and arms. We can see the lower body still kind of staying steady. Now he's going to set. Now so from this 3/4-ish way, we're going to see the turn happen, and that happens with his lower body. So we see that lower body really closing down, turning. We see his right knee bracing in while he gets that turn. Right side of the screen, we can still see this going on here. Hands get high above that secondary plane line because his hands are just more involved in the takeaway. We see that shoulder turn. So he is one of those players that gets the shoulder turn later. So it doesn't matter if you get it earlier or later, as long as you get it there. And we can see his whole body is facing the camera, so he's definitely turned enough. If we check this out relative to his turn, so his turns just past 90, we can see that his club is at parallel, so that's pretty good. It's not a lot of hand manipulation, because if it was, that club shaft would be a la John Daly back over here. So again, if you hear people say get that club to parallel, only do this if you can have at least 90 degrees of rotation, and even then, you want to be shy of parallel. We can see weight distribution. We see that center of his chest leaning back towards his back foot, so he is starting to store up energy Just like when you guys throw a ball, you don't throw a ball from your lead foot. You actually transfer energy from your trail foot to your lead foot, and that's just going to help you get your whole body weight involved. He's a smaller man, so he needs to get most of his body involved. So the setup helped him do that because of that accentuated tilt. He can just turn, and then his body's already kind of on his left side. So now he's going to drive into it. Top of the swing, we see that club face in relation to his left shoulder, slightly open, and we saw that manipulation on the way back. He's just rolling his hands up there. Shoulder tilt looks fairly good. So if we draw that shoulder tilt, it's somewhat still in his initial spine angle, which is good. So his shoulders are just turning around that spine, not a lot of body manipulation, ready to go. So left side of the screen, this is where he starts to manipulate the upper body to counteract that setup. Left side of the screen, we're going to see his left shoulder start to tilt down and turn, and we can see he's got a great angle here. So he has a lot of conservation of angular momentum, and he's going to try and store that angle for as long as he can. But in order to do that, he has to move heavily to his back brace line, which is this small little red line here. So let's just take a look at that. As he drops down in, we see the tilt is allowing that club to drop down pretty quick to that lower plane line, but also the turn is allowing that club head to travel pretty close to the plane line down to the golf ball, because if he just tilted and kept tilting without turning, he'd make contact about 3 feet behind the golf ball. So to make sure that club head now rides down that plane line as close as he can, he has to turn as well. So he is one that needs to tilt and turn to make the swing work while managing his weight correctly. So his foot weighting is going to be going to his right heel from his toe, so we can see him pushing off to that side. Look how he's standing in that posture. Pretty solid there. Now once you get down to this impact position, we can see an exaggerated tilting. Now this tilt allows that left shoulder of his to tilt down, so it's still fairly close to being level. Now I know that tilt line is a little bit crooked because it's hard to draw a straight line when your back is formed with almost a reverse C, when nobody's back can be completely straight at impact. But what we're trying to look at is the increase of shoulder tilt to help hold off that release. Left side of the screen, we can start to go down to impact. We see he's carrying that angle pretty well, so he is a very laggy motion. And we take a look at his hands now. His hands are, let's go to a couple more frames right there. So that's where he's set up. So this is basically staying in his setup angle, but look at all this angle he has created from his wrist hinge. So now the hands can deliver all that power while he has already established his turn and tilt. So you don't see much more tilting or turning from this motion to here, but he has essentially created the room on the right side of the screen. We can see that nice room, that gap that his arms and hands can travel through. If he did not have that gap, he would have to flip and he wouldn't hit the golf ball at tour level. And he only got that gap because he stayed on that back brace line. Now if we keep going through, we just clean some of these lines up, but if you take a look at his left shoulder, it is arriving in the same position. However, it is arriving with more tilt. So that increase of tilt helps his hands stay out in front, which is what he wants, and he is still carrying some angle down at impact, which is holding off that release. Because if he was more upright here, that club face would have already started to shut down. So this is why I say when you forward press, you have to hold on to your release, and if you don't have the correct body makeup, it's going to be very hard. If you don't control your weighting system, it's going to be very hard, and you're going to struggle. So if we see this, once we go past impact on the right side of the screen, we see that club head now just catching up and turning over, and what we look at is the path, the exit path of his hands. We see that club head is leaving on his initial upper plane line, and it gets pretty close to that upper plane line, but his hand path is higher than the upper plane line. So you can see how much he had to release post impact because of that accentuated setup at the beginning. And we know that if we take a look at his spine angle here, that long purple line, and we look at his shoulder tilt line, he stayed in that same shoulder tilt pre-impact, and now his hand path is perpendicular to that shoulder tilt. So everything works around your shoulder tilt. Your shoulder tilt works around your spine works around weight management and creating the room for your arms and hands to do this. Now as he comes on through, he's more connected. When he finishes, he is closer to his initial spine angle. Left side of the screen, we can see now the hands. There goes that release. It's like delayed release. He holds it. The club face is just turning now because of that turn after impact. And now the hands take over because of that delayed release. You can only hold it for so long before you break your wrist. And he comes on through and he has this now. You can see where his weighting is over his right foot because you can't stay back there and hit the golf ball to a quality level. So he's still getting his weighting over. He's still getting his upper body over to where the golf ball was. So this is where the golf ball was, that tee's on the ground, and that's where his center finishes. So this is something that I don't recommend average players do, so be wary. Your setup dictates everything in the swing, and if you have a body that can handle your setup, you'll be fine. But if you have a body that does not handle your setup, good luck. So as usual, don't fall for the YouTube videos. Don't try any tricks and tips unless you are working with somebody who suggests those to you based on your motions and your body makeup. If you're having a golf pro that has not done a simple assessment on your body makeup, go find another golf pro. Don't find that needle in the haystack. It's not going to work for you. Hope you enjoy this. If you do like this, hit that like and subscribe. We're really trying to help this channel grow. We donate our profits from this channel to the Heal the Hood Foundation, which helps introduce golf to low-income children. So you'll be doing your part to help me help them. Hope that helps you, everybody. As usual, fairways and greens.
Models don't want to battle me, haters be looking mad at me, but they don't want to rattle me. Get a new strategy, turn around your tragedy, and this'll be the end. Fatality.
The battle zone, go hard.